Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Wow, this is the quickest I'm going to start. Before we begin, it's our tradition to go around the room and say our names. I'll go ahead and begin. If I may, my name is Roy.
I'm Tom.
I'm Brad.
James.
Greg.
Yes.
Claudio. Max. Scott.
My name is Mark.
I'm David.
My name is Rich.
Harley.
Jim.
Don.
David.
Kim.
Jim. I'm Jerry.
David.
My name is Jeff. Larry.
Jerry.
David.
Matthew.
Mikey.
Jack.
My name is Cass.
Tim. George.
David.
My name is
Paul. Kevin.
Leor.
Peter.
I'm Hal.
I'm Clint.
I'm Richard.
Jay.
Samantha.
And besides Kim today, is there anyone else joining us for the first time today or coming back after a long absence? Your name? Kim? Samantha? Great, welcome. Anyone else? Okay. That door keeps popping open. Okay. So our speaker today is Trip Weil. Trip has been practicing in the Theravadan tradition since 2004. He's a graduate of Spirit Rock's Community Dharma Leader and Dedicated Practitioners program. Trip serves on the board of San Francisco Insight, where he leads sitting groups and teaches meditation classes. He's a psychotherapist in private practice in San Francisco and a former attorney. Welcome, Trip.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. A big group. It's nice. I'm used to speaking in front of smaller groups, so it's kind of a different experience for me to be with so many people at once, and I like it. So far. We'll see. So, I want to talk about a subject that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I also want to just say, if you're having a hard time hearing me, I'm going to try to speak up, but raise your hand and let me know. I'll go even louder. So I want to talk about something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is the notion of refuge. Refuge, one of the most beautiful teachings in Buddhism, in my experience, the notion of the triple jewel of the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. Thinking more broadly about refuge, it's really about where do we go for safety? Where is there safety in this world? As I ask myself that question lately, I find that there's less than I thought there was. I imagine many of us have been struggling in the last few months, say, with a world that feels a little shakier than it did before, a little less secure or safe. So the notion of refuge at the outset invites us to consider what actually is true safety and what might be actually some sort of a trap that is dressed up as safety. It kind of looks like safety, but actually it's a trap. The Buddha's life itself is a great teacher for this movement from a kind of relative safety to a more reliable safety. You know, he was born in fantastic circumstances, grew up in palaces and with every possible advantage that one might have. And in some ways seemed to be in the safest possible place he could be, and yet things weren't quite right, and he knew it. And he knew, especially as he started to understand the dangers that others experienced in the world that he wasn't yet experiencing, the risks that come from old age, sickness, death, that he hadn't really seen in his time in the palace. He was very secluded, and purposefully his father tried to keep him from understanding anything about the difficulties in the world so that he would stick around. So he made this movement away from this kind of conditioned safety that actually wasn't so safe, following somehow a sense that there was something even better out there. So let's just sort of hold that as a kind of framework for movement, from the sense of a kind of perceived safety that turns out not to be so reliable toward one that actually is. I've been watching that series, When We Rise. Any of you seen that on TV? And it's been really moving for me to think about San Francisco as refuge, and to think about how that actually wasn't always the case. Seeing those the early episode about what it was like say when Cleve Jones first came here, and I moved here in 1985, and for me it was a similar kind of migration. It was like, where can I find relative safety as a gay man? Where's going to be a good place for me to be out, to be who I am? And by the time I got here, that sense of basic sort of security, like, well, this is a relatively good place to be, was pretty firmly entrenched, even as there were obvious concerns and risks that were part of the situation. But when I think about what it was like, going back a few years before that, when you couldn't even expect the police to be protecting you here, and then you think about the movement of how our sense of safety kind of comes and goes. It's not stable, and it's not stable in a particular place or in a particular time. So what's not so reliable these days? Well, I don't know, kind of everything. Like, in some ways, even the truth itself seems not reliable. Or at least some sort of a shared understanding of the truth that I know I really invested in, and am definitely having a hard time letting go of. As we talk about refuge, or where there's true safety, in some ways it means letting go of this world, letting go of a sense that there's any particular place in the world that is safe from the world. I can remember as a kid feeling a lot of fear at times, and I would ask my mother to reassure me. I can remember going to her and saying, please tell me that everything is going to be okay, for example. And she would, in a way, but it was like, oh, I can't fully believe this. Like, I don't have complete confidence in what I'm hearing. And it was very upsetting to me to think that even in the sort of safest possible place, which would be for me, kind of getting reassurance from my mother, I didn't actually feel safe. I felt maybe a little better, but I didn't really feel safe. And didn't feel the safety I was looking for anyway. And I think that's part of what brings me to practice, maybe what brings many of us to practice, is some understanding that we can't find safety from the world in the world. Like, the world is never going to line up to provide complete, lasting safety. It's not possible. So what is refuge? Where is safety? There's an internal and an external component to each of those three refuges: Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So the external is something that each of those symbolizes, and the internal is the quality of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha that exist within us. And just to spell out what each of those means in the most basic sense, Buddha being the Buddha himself, the man himself, as an external refuge. The fact that there's this person who existed in the world. Dharma, the teachings themselves, the truth of the teachings. And Sangha, the community, the community of the Buddha's followers or the larger community. So we'll look a little bit at the internal and the external quality of each. Starting with a reading from Thanissaro Bhikkhu. Buddhism is not a theistic religion. The Buddha is not a god. And so a person taking refuge in the Buddhist sense is not asking for the Buddha personally to intervene to provide protection. Still, the Buddha's teachings center on the realization that human life is fraught with dangers from greed, anger, and delusion. And so the concept of refuge is a central part of the path of practice, in that the practice is aimed at gaining release from these dangers. Because both the dangers and the release from them come ultimately from the mind, there is a need for two levels of refuge. External refuges, which provide models and guidelines so that we can identify which qualities in the mind lead to danger and which to release. And internal refuges, namely the qualities leading to release that we develop in our own mind in imitation of our external models. The internal level is where true refuge is found. So there's a really important recognition here that freedom and danger ultimately exist within the mind. And that's where the true refuge is going to be found, that these three refuges of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are about having external images in the world that then we internalize somehow, or have already internalized. So the Buddha refuge, externally, is refuge in the journey of the man himself and his achievement. We can take inspiration from that. There's this person who, through his life, or perhaps through many, many, many lives, found freedom, found safety, found true ease. And it's very inspiring to think about that. That it's actually possible that someone did it. Many people have done it, maybe even. Internally, I would say that this refuge, the Buddha refuge, is, first of all, the possibility of freedom here. It's possible that we can be free. And even more kind of immediately, the Buddha refuge to me is the subjective part that moves toward freedom, that wants it, that has that impulse, that has the spark or the drive. The part in each of us that says, I need to find something a little bit different. I need to, this isn't quite it. The part when you're sitting, as you just were, as we all just were, that when the mind has wandered, wants to come back. That's actually taking Buddha refuge right there, over and over and over again. Every time the mind goes away and comes back, that's that movement of Buddha refuge. Why do you do that? Actually, why do you do that? I'm curious, actually, if anyone wants to say, why do you do that?
Relief.
Relief. You want to say more about the relief that you get?
So letting go, so not getting caught up. It's a little bit of freedom.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else? Why do you do that? Thanks.
But it grounds me into more of the present time.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Please.
This worrying about everything gets old after a while.
It does, doesn't it? It's like enough's enough. Yeah, thanks. Please.
Just shows how crazy my mind really is.
Shows how crazy your mind is. It's like you see something, and that's why you do it. Yeah. And if you're not speaking, maybe you're still reflecting on just why it is that in that moment the mind is gone and you come back. Why do you do that over and over and over again? You have a reason, or many reasons.
Well, I think that based on the teachings and what I hear, that hopefully there's this promise of more release of that in the future, that if I do this now, even though it's hard and hard work, that it's will ultimately shape the plasticity of the mind and become less so. So it's goal-directed.
Yeah, it's goal-directed. It feels like an investment somehow in a better future in the mind.
It feels good.
It feels good. It does, doesn't
Although
it?
the externals don't feel good.
Yeah, it feels good. It does. Thank you.
It's where the truth is.
It's where the truth is. You know that somehow.
If I remember.
If you're well. Yeah. And what makes you want to move toward the truth?
Well, it's what's real. It's what's really real.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than the nightmare scenario I entertain.
Mm-hmm. And you'd actually rather be with what's real, it turns out. Thanks.
I think the shift of perspective also for later on in the day.
Uh-huh.
I find that I can go back to it,
Mm-hmm.
because I'll forget about it, then all of a sudden, oh wait, it just kind of shifts the perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
It just brings more calmness, more peace.
Uh-huh. And you want that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
It's the same old stuff.
Same old stuff. Say a little bit more. What's
The thoughts are the same.
Uh-huh.
The feelings and the experience is always the same, so I try to come back to the present.
Uh-huh. Kind of like getting off the wheel or something. Yeah. I think about the movie Groundhog Day. People remember that? Yeah. Where the Bill Murray character is living the same day over and over and over again. And he has to find a way out. He has to. Well, he doesn't have to. I mean, he could just let that keep going and going. But he wants to. He wants to find a way out. And so he has to start experimenting. And he's experimenting with a lot of different things. In the beginning, he's experimenting with hedonism, with nihilism. He's experimenting with kind of different ways to respond to the situation. But if you remember the movie, or if you don't, it's a little spoiler, but it's been a while, so he really finds his way out through kindness. It's like when he starts really experimenting with kindness that he starts to see some change and some improvement and some possibility. And so this starts to orient us toward the Dharma refuge. The Dharma refuge externally is the truth of the teachings themselves, the teachings about what causes suffering and what leads to freedom from suffering. It's wisdom. And wisdom is a kind of knowledge, but it's a particular kind of knowledge. It's like orienting knowledge, like a compass. A kind of knowledge that there's lots of knowledge out there, lots of things that we can know. But this is a particular kind of knowledge about how to get where we want to go and how to judge whether we're on the path or not in a moment, in a given moment. Is this leading to freedom? Is this leading to more suffering? And one of the primary ways that we can do that, and certainly classically one of the ways that we do that, is by orienting toward kindness, toward compassion, toward renunciation, letting go of what isn't needed in this moment. So on an external level, when we take refuge in the Dhamma, we are just taking refuge in this orienting knowledge, in this wisdom. This is something that we can live by. We can return to it. It's in the mind, and then we call on it. At another level for me, so just to say then that the internal version is that internalization of the knowledge. It's like now it's in here. It's not just out there. It's actually in here. And if you think back on your own practice, you might actually think about how that has come to be. How you have come to trust the truth of the teachings. How you've come to know how suffering actually gets created versus how you maybe thought it got created in the past. How you've come to understand and really have faith in what actually helps versus what seems like it's going to help. Often it's that understanding that we feel better when we move toward things, even if they're difficult, rather than trying to move away from them. Is that something that you've seen in your own life and seen through practice? As you keep doing it over and over, it actually that movement actually does work. I'm curious, does anyone think it doesn't? Anyone have a sense that like, actually it's not so helpful? Sometimes maybe it's not. Yeah.
Well, I guess what I see with myself is that there are moments of freedom or meditation, or when you're, for me, in nature and seeing things, and then what I see with myself is it's there, and then all of a sudden you're pulled back into being stuck and being attached.
So it comes and goes. There are moments of freedom, and then you find yourself being stuck again. Yeah. It's kind of a forgetting, isn't it? Like that's how I think of it. It's like you sort of forget or get lulled in, or the mind just isn't quite strong enough. In a way, the awareness isn't quite strong enough.
And you also have to believe that there is a true freedom, and that all the things we do for safety and security, such as support and finances and jobs, isn't really a true reality, despite what everybody on TV and around you is the message you're given. So,
yeah.
I mean, you could, if you really believed it, would you do all the things we do during the day to seek out freedom and safety?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's it. It's like, if you really believe that all that stuff was going to work, you probably wouldn't be here. You'd be out doing that. So it's that the internal Dharma refuge is that belief, is that understanding that's already in here, that brought you here instead of wherever else you might have gone this morning. It's in you already. You know it. You know it's already, it's in you. It's orienting you. It's guiding you. It's the compass that brought you here. And there's another level of the kind of internal Dharma refuge that I wanted to bring up. which is maybe a little harder to describe. But it, for me, is the reliability of the truth of how things are. In each moment, there is a kind of truth of how things are. And while things are in the conditioned world are constantly changing, that truth quality is constant in the sense that it always exists. There's always the truth of how things are. You can always find that. I mean, you might not always be able to, but at least potentially you can always find that. And when you do, I'll say for myself, when I do, there is a kind of relief. Like no matter what it is, the fact that I have connected to the truth of how things are, the Dharma, brings a sense of relief. I sometimes think about a kind of visual version of this for myself, which is like imagining like a fun house kind of a situation where you have, these funny mirrors and maybe even two mirrors that are sort of facing each other but just a little bit off. And so as you look into one mirror, you're actually seeing this kind of like infinite version, but just kind of curving around a little bit. It's like if I'm looking at my face in these mirrors that are not quite aligned, then it's just me, as far as the eye can see, kind of curving off into space. And it's pretty horrifying in my experience. But when things line up, when I would say there's that simple experience of this is just how things are, it's awareness, seeing awareness, then suddenly I maybe see my face once, and beyond it is just infinite space holding it all. And it's such a sweet feeling. Visually, it brings up such a nice feeling in the body. Does anyone have that experience or have a sense of what I'm talking about? It's like you're just looking into infinity. And it all feels fine. And no matter what might be in that initial reflection, there's something about the way that it's held in that kind of infinite reality that is soothing. So to me, that's that sense of the refuge of just the truth of how things are that's always possible. You can always sort of get that line up. It's always at least possible. Another time in my own life that I think about when I feel like I first kind of got a taste of this without having any idea what I was getting a taste of. I remember being in maybe like 9th grade, and I was on the football team, the sort of below the junior varsity version, like just high enough that you had to actually go and compete with other schools. And I don't know why I was there. I should not have been there. I didn't want to be playing football. I never wanted to be playing football. But I think I was a little afraid of not playing football, of being like one of the 8 guys that was doing cross country, which actually would have been much better for me. But I wasn't really quite brave enough to take that step. So there I was on the football team, like the worst possible player, and I'm not saying it with any sense of exaggeration, the worst. I mean, I was given a position, I think I was the alternate, or probably the second alternate center. So, like...
That's a tough position, though.
Only if you actually get into a game, though.
But I played that position.
Yeah.
It's not an easy position. Why did they put you there?
I have no... I think...
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm getting off track.
No, I wish I could say...
I love... Yeah.
We'll have to ask Mr. Lemon why he put me there, whoever it was. But it's not even so much about the games that I wanted to, the little story that I'm telling. I'm more just sort of telling the story that creates the sense of how out of place I was. And actually the other aspect of it was just how kind of frightening those games were for me, because although there was very little chance that I would see any play, if we happened to be like really, really winning, I might get in for, one down or something. And it wasn't even so much, it wasn't fear about getting injured or anything like that. It was that I was going to screw up. It's an important role. Mm-hmm. And, you can be responsible. And it was hard. It was hard on the mind.
It starts with you, right? 'Cause you gotta
it starts with you,
yeah.
Or else it doesn't start at all. Yeah, thank you. So the moments I'm really actually trying to describe were on the bus. We'd have these bus rides to the games, and they lasted, sometimes 45 minutes or something, clear across town. And I can remember sitting on the bus and feeling this kind of panic, real just like deep panic in my body. And the more I thought about it, the sort of harder it got, the more it sort of held my body. But what I discovered was that if I just looked around, like outside the bus, like here are people and they're in their cars and it's raining and I see the red lights from the taillights of the cars and everyone's just kind of going about their business. And I'm here and I'm feeling petrified. And all that's true. That's just exactly how it is right now. Then this sense of peace would come over me. And it was a shift in a moment. For no good reason. Nothing had changed except the orientation of my mind. Instead of fighting what was happening, I simply knew it. Simply knew it. And knew it in a kind of broader context. So for me, that's that refuge of just the truth of how things are. And it's constantly possible. It's here in every moment. There's a truth of how things are right now. When we connect to that, there's a kind of ease. So I want to speak finally to the third refuge of Sangha. Externally, the Sangha refuge is the followers of the Buddha, the people who, such as us, the people who are orienting their lives in this way, the people who might not even be Buddhist. Maybe you're not a Buddhist, or you don't think of yourself as a Buddhist. The people actually, even who have never been taught the teachings of the Buddha per se, but still are following them. Because as the Buddha said, there's really only one Dharma. It doesn't have to be taught in this particular way. You don't have to come across it in this particular way. There are lots of people out there who are living according to the Dharma without even knowing about the Dharma. And we inspire each other. There's a kind of inspiration and support that comes from that. Internally, as Gil Fronsdal puts it, the refuge of Sangha encompasses our own capacity for goodness, such as our kindness, compassion, and generosity. The path of non-harming and awakening does not depend only on our efforts to practice. We also need to be supported by those whose wholesome feelings, motivations, and attitudes we are capable of, but often overlook. To take inner refuge in the Sangha is to have confidence in our inner capacity for goodness, even when it may not be evident. To take refuge, inner refuge in the Sangha, is to have confidence in our inner capacity for goodness, even when it may not be evident. It's holding that possibility, even when we don't know that it's there. And I'd like to add another dimension to this inner version, this inner refuge of Sangha, which includes our openness to both moving and being moved by others, allowing ourselves to have an impact on others, allowing others to have an impact on us. I feel like in my own life I've resisted that in many ways and many times. But as I think about the challenges that face the world right now, I find that to be a kind of a radical movement within myself, to actually trust the possibility of moving and being moved, even when in many ways the dangers seem to be others. For me lately, the refuge of Sangha means being more inclusive, being more open, being open to people who seem quite different, even who have different points of view. We know from experience that in some ways we need to create safety. Well, I'm going back to the historical perspective. In some ways it feels like I created safety for myself by coming to a place like San Francisco and coming to communities like this where I wouldn't feel afraid as a gay man. But I also know that in some ways that has made my life smaller. There are people who, I grew up in the Midwest and went to college on the East Coast. Almost everyone I know, my entire life was oriented, basically like, well, I grew up in St. Louis, so I was going to say east of the Mississippi, but let's say 15 miles west of the Mississippi and east. And now, my entire world is, for the most part, 1,000 miles west of the Mississippi. And there's a lot of loss, in a way, that has come from that. People who used to be really important to me and who I still care about, but I'm just not that connected to anymore. And I know from Facebook, some of them have really different ideas about the world than I do. And I have a lot of compassion at this point. I saw something in the New York Times. It was a chart that they had done, and it was looking at a sort of scatter. What do they call that? A scatter plot of many of the actions of the first month of the presidency, and it was a matrix, a 2x2 matrix. So on one axis, thank you, we had things that were important, actions that were important, and actions that were unimportant. And on the other axis, it was actions that were, how did they put it? Normal and abnormal. And you can imagine which quadrant many of these dots were in. Important, abnormal. Important, abnormal. There's a lot of important abnormal going on in the world these days. And that is a very activating quadrant for the human nervous system. And that's not just our nervous system. That is every nervous system. Everyone is experiencing a kind of activation from this. I was going to use the word crazy, but let's try to keep it as neutral as we can. This cluster without an F after it, cluster of abnormal important activity that's very activating. And we can see it. And if we think of it that way, as I think of it that way, I actually feel a lot of compassion because I see a lot of people out there who maybe have very different points of views, and I can understand their actions and their vehemence and everything from the perspective of they're really activated too. Their nervous system is also like on hyperdrive. We are maybe experiencing it differently, but the kind of accelerator or the multiplier effect of the responses is probably the same. It's just this shift in paradigm. And also appreciating this other commonality, which is that we all want to be happy. And to the extent that we suffer, we all suffer because of some kind of basic confusion about what causes happiness and what leads to freedom from happiness. We all carry some confusion, or I carry some confusion about that. I think most people carry confusion about that on some level. And to the extent that we suffer, then we know that we do carry confusion about that. It's true for everyone. There's always some level of entrenched ignorance. And yet, as the quote that I read a little while ago from Gil Fronsdal points out, we all have untapped reserves of kindness, compassion, and renunciation. We all have it within us. And so the Sangha refuge, I want to suggest, can include asking ourselves, how do we support others, and how do we get support from others in finding those reserves? How do we support each other in bringing out our kindness? How do we feel supported by others in turning toward kindness, toward non-harming? What do we need to do in ourselves to be even more open to that possibility? What movement are we willing to take? And not to suggest that that means some sort of capitulation to forces that we really feel aren't helpful. But it does mean maybe in some way opening to them, or opening to relating to them somehow, and more importantly, opening to the people that are behind them and the commonality. They want happiness. Right now they're pretty activated, just like us. So I'm going to stop after reading a poem and have a little time left for questions or more comments. The poem I want to end with is Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers, eating maize and chicken, will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore, only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread, only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. So, thank you. Anyone have anything they'd like to say? Please.
I was thinking about the metrics through which we look at things, and there was that scatter chart of importance and abnormal or normal. But it seems to me there's another metric which would be kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that fit on there? And why don't we talk about that more as a society?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question. Yeah. I think that's a really important orientation. I mean, if when we get serious about suffering, then I think we do start to have that as our scatter plot. And I think that's a really nice reminder that's. I'm resonating with that personally right now, just thinking like, yeah, that's how I'm trying to lead my life. Be concerned about that quadrant. Kind versus unkind. And I'm trying to think what's the other side for me. It's certainly important.
Wisdom.
Wisdom. Mm-hmm. Action. Kind action. Kind wisdom. Right action. Other ideas? How would you label that quadrant? Oh, no. You have something different. Yeah. Well, something to think about. What does that quadrant really mean for you? Thanks. Please.
Oh, two things that came up. One around the idea of safety, and the other one about activation. But one of the thoughts among thousands of thoughts that came up over the election was this feeling that suddenly the world seems a lot less safe. And for me, one of the thoughts that came up was that this idea, that this feeling of safety that I had, that was just an illusion. And that suddenly, this is what the world is really like. So I'm just sharing that. The other idea about activation, it seems like you're talking about this feeling of that the potential in that quadrant for things to happen, good things to come out of people being activated by the situation. And I really felt that at the Women's March, and it was filled with such goodwill, such good cheer and goodwill. It was just I suddenly felt optimistic again.
Yeah.
Yesterday, a friend of mine and I went to see a play at Berkeley Rep, so we had to kind of maneuver our way around the counter protests, and I was so disheartened this morning to see, that Trump supporters people were beating them and kicking them. And just thinking about it now, it really wasn't out of compassion for them. My thought was, it's making us look bad. They're just going to use that against us. So, I guess, there's still a way to work, a lot of work to be done as far as dealing with. But I do feel it's so important that we be able to be open and be able to listen to people who have really different views.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And important the work that you're doing, that you just described, which is to really notice what's actually going on in your own mind. That there wasn't compassion in that moment, but then there's the possibility of it, or including that with your other reaction. Thanks.
What would you say to people who don't believe in cessation or the end of suffering? That I don't have that from my practice. I don't know anybody in a sense, not just moments. Do you believe there's a continuum of working to be less attached, less suffering?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So you're asking what would
I just want to hear your thoughts on that, because we often in Buddhism talk about absolutes, the end of suffering, total freedom, clear thinking, and I don't know anybody that has that.
No, yeah. I actually don't think I do either. I mean, for me, it's like, single point perspective, it's like the vanishing point on the horizon. It's like all the lines are leading to it. But it's always going to be out there until it's not. And
but you need faith that it's possible in order to be on the path.
Are you asking me? Do I think you need faith? Absolutely. I believe you do need to have faith in the possibility of it. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say, oh, well, it isn't possible, but if you look at your own experience, someone else was already talking about like the moments of freedom. If you look at your own experience, you know that there are moments like that, and that they are possible, and that you also know that there's nothing but moments. I mean, there's nothing but a series of moments. So you could say, and certainly many people do, that complete freedom is possible, in a given moment, and that we might have had that experience, or something that gets very close to it. So not so much to focus on it as as something that's so far out there and so grand that it's not likely to be achieved, but more as a kind of fruition that actually is possible, moment by moment. And believing that that's true. From experience, yeah. So, please.
A couple of thoughts.
And this will be our last question.
Thank you.
I know that when I'm very activated, then I definitely seem to lose my capacity for kindness or humor. It could be something as neutral as a computer system not working, and then all of a sudden, I don't even want to smile at people that I like. So that's just the reality when people talk. In the moment, that's what happened. The other thing I was thinking about, my sense is like, even like a 25% reduction in suffering or anxiety or anything will be a great quality of life improvement. And perhaps those of us who suffer the most in some of these are more likely to appreciate even if 10%, 15%. So that'd be great. Like,
yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Appreciate it. Okay, so we'll do our announcements. Let's see. So our speaker next week will be Tom Moon. Tom has been a practitioner of Vipassana meditation for 15 years, and his spiritual home is Spirit Rock Meditation Center. He's a psychologist in San Francisco working primarily with gay men. His chief commitment is in exploring the interface between Buddhist practice and psychotherapy. So he'll be here next week. Donna is the Hollywood for Giving. Our host today will be passing the Donna Bowl, and the suggested donation is $10. It does facilitate our having this beautiful space every Sunday. It helps to cover the rent, the newsletter costs, our speakers, and the Larkin Street dinners. So, but whatever you can give is greatly appreciated. Can we hear from our host?
Yes, my name is Jim. I'm your host. There's hot water and tea. Please leave your cups in the sink, and I will take care of them. There's a sign-up sheet on this credentia if you are not on our email list. I will be going around with the Donna Bowl. I'm inexorable. You shall not pass. And at 12:30, some people who would like to have lunch gather out at the doorstep and go out for lunch. There is a retreat, a day-long retreat here.
Yes, it's going to be on Saturday, March 25th.
And there's special sign-up.
There's a green flyer.
Green flyer on
Okay.
the counter over here, so please do sign up. There's about 20 spaces left, but we want to know who all is coming because we're giving you a free lunch. It's free of charge. We do ask that you be generous with Don for our teacher, Ms. Sunderberg. And it's from 9:30 to 5.
And there's a link to where you have.
Yes, there's on the sheet. There's more from there.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Anything? Okay, let's go ahead and stand for the dedication of merit. I like
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.